Part 1. Rejection. Last July, I uncovered my wife's infidelity, and since then, I've been trapped in a personal hell. It was utterly unexpected. I never would have guessed it. Initially, I couldn't believe she was capable of betrayal. For over 8 years, our marriage had been a source of immense happiness for me. Renowned psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross famously proposed that individuals facing imminent death or another catastrophic event experience 5 emotional stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I recalled this framework from a psychology lecture in college. Denial is the first stage, and I found myself deeply entrenched in it. If Sherry had indeed been unfaithful, then our marriage was as good as dead. But I struggled to accept this harsh reality. I pondered whether I would pass through each stage of grief for the demise of our love, and whether, even upon reaching acceptance, the pain and heartbreak would continue to haunt me indefinitely. I met Sherry during my college years. I was majoring in computer science, and as part of the curriculum, I had to endure an English class. The thought of slogging through literature and poetry by long-dead authors didn't excite me. My brain was already crammed with lines of code and thoughts of where the next party would be. Like the archetypal computer nerd, I was tall, somewhat gawky, and my social life was, to put it mildly, unimpressive. I was an average student, not particularly athletic, and didn't participate in clubs or extracurricular activities. But I excelled with computers. I was the guy everyone recognized, but whose name they couldn't recall. My romantic history was similarly uneventful. It featured a brief fling with Lillian Morris after high school graduation. I suspect she pitied me. We lasted almost 2 months before she moved on. Post Lillian, my fellow computer geeks, and I would boast about our imaginary romantic exploits and speculate about the hot girl in class, knowing full well it was just fantasy. Then Sherry came along. She sat next to me in English, and her deep hazel eyes captivated me from the start. During that first class, I was too mesmerized by her eyes to notice much else, but as she left, I got a glimpse of the whole package. Sherry had shoulder-length blonde hair with a slight curl, a cute button nose, and lips that always seemed to have a hint of a smile. She was around 5'7", and while I wasn't adept at estimating bra sizes, I could tell she filled out her shirt nicely. Her tight jeans perfectly showcased her sculpted backside. To me, she was perfect. Every day after that initial encounter, I made it a point to sit next to her. After a month, she finally spoke to me. She mentioned noticing my calculus books and asked if I could tutor her, explaining that she was struggling with college algebra and needed to pass the class to graduate. I would have agreed to anything she requested. We began meeting in the library on Tuesdays and Thursdays after class. While I tried my best to stay focused, sitting next to the most beautiful girl I had ever seen often turned my mind to mush. Yet something must have worked because Sherry earned a B on her midterm exam. She was ecstatic. When she found out her grade, she jumped up and down before grabbing me in a celebratory hug. She kissed my cheek, and I thought my head was going to explode. I was in heaven. Then, in a moment entirely out of character, I blurted out, "Do you want to see a movie on Friday?" "Sure. What time?" she replied effortlessly. "Wait, what?" I stammered. I said yes, dummy. I don't think my feet touched the ground all the way back to my dorm room. I spent the rest of the week in a blissful daze, even hitting the store to buy a new pair of Dockers and a polo shirt for the occasion. My nerd friends teased me relentlessly, but I took it all with a smile on my face. I was counting the minutes until our date, and somehow I managed to survive the anticipation until Friday night finally arrived. Our first date was to see the latest Halloween movie. I know, not the most sophisticated choice. It was your typical slasher flick, full of blood, dismemberments, and clueless characters. I figured she'd end up clinging to me in fear, but that wasn't the case. Nevertheless, we had a blast. Sherry and I whispered predictions about which character would meet their end next. She was right more often than I was. Later, she gave me a quick goodnight kiss on her doorstep. By our 4th date, she invited me to her dorm room, and that was the first time we were intimate. It must have been good for her, because she invited me back up again after our next outing. From that point on, we became a couple. Amazingly, we discovered we had a lot in common. We enjoyed the same movies, read the same books, and loved the same foods. After a couple of months, I found myself deeply in love. As finals approached, I was sure she felt the same way. We were incredibly happy. Just before Christmas break, while lying in her bed, I told her I loved her and that she was the best thing that had ever happened to me. She smiled and said, "I love you too." Life was perfect. Even though we didn't share any classes during the spring semester, we still studied together in the library every day after school. Our relationship picked up right where it had left off after the break, growing stronger each week. We spent spring break together, renting a cabin by the lake. My plans included hiking and fishing, but I don't think we left the cabin the entire week. On the last night, I got down on one knee and proposed. She said yes. 3 months later, we graduated, and 5 months after that, we were married. After finishing school, I landed a job in computer security. Our company specialized in integrating security software for small businesses, which typically had between 10 and 50 workstations. My role involved writing code to enable different systems to communicate effectively. My boss, Clinton, founded the company a decade ago with just 2 employees. Through several mergers and acquisitions, the company grew to about 50 employees and was thriving. Clinton was not only a good boss, but also a great mentor. After I had been with the company for around 5 years, Clinton received an offer to sell the business. He mentioned that a major venture capital group in the city needed our niche in the small business market to complement a larger computer division. The offer was too lucrative to refuse, so he sold the company. Part of the agreement was that all of us would keep our jobs and Clinton would stay on as manager. The transition was seamless. We never met the new owners, and Clinton continued to manage the company as usual. Work went on uninterrupted. Sherry, on the other hand, secured a job right after graduation with Dr. Albert Barnes, a dentist. She stepped into the role of office manager. Dr. Barnes, a kindly old dentist, reminded me of the absent-minded professor, complete with the quirky glasses perched on the end of his nose that he was always misplacing. Despite his often confused demeanor, Dr. Barnes was a wizard in dentistry. His skills were unparalleled in the area, attracting patients from great distances, provided they could secure an appointment. When Sherry started, the office was in disarray, bills were unpaid, files were lost, and the billing systems were outdated. In short, it was a total mess. Sherry took on the task of revitalizing the doctor's practice, and her efforts yielded revolutionary results. Within 3 years, the doctor's office became the envy of the region. Revenues soared, employee turnover vanished, morale hit an all-time high, and even the doctor's appearance improved. Sherry was the catalyst behind these dramatic changes, and I couldn't have been prouder. After our wedding, Sherry and I settled into a cozy apartment near my workplace. We decided to focus on building our careers before starting a family. We made it a tradition to take a vacation every year on our anniversary. In the beginning, budget constraints meant we could only visit our lakeside cabin. But as time passed, our trips improved. One memorable year, we even spent a week at Disney World in Florida. 5 years into apartment living, we started looking for a house. After a few months of searching, we found a small home with ample space for our future family. We bought it and moved in, eager to start this new chapter in our lives. 7 years into her career, Sherry came home brimming with excitement. Her excellent management and organizational skills at the doctor's office had not gone unnoticed. Some high-profile executives, who were patients of the good doctor, began inquiring about Sherry. They were impressed with the office's transformation and had commented on it to Dr. Albert Barnes, who couldn't praise Sherry enough. One of these executives even approached Sherry with a job offer. That night and over the next few days, we talked about the offer extensively. I felt we were on the cusp of starting a family, and taking this new job would delay that plan by a couple of years. Financially, we were secure, and Dr. Albert Barnes was practically family to us. However, she believed the new role could lead to even greater opportunities in the future. She suggested that if we could postpone having a family for a few years, she would make it worth the wait. Feeling I had little choice, I eventually gave in. A month later, Sherry began her new position as the personal assistant to Jason Foster, the vice president of finance at Cascade Capital. Unbeknownst to me at the time, Cascade Capital was the venture capital firm that ultimately owned the company where I was already employed. At first, I didn't notice any significant changes in Sherry or in our relationship. Our intimate moments did decrease, but I attributed that to the sometimes odd hours she and her boss worked. Occasionally, she had to attend late meetings, which left her exhausted by the time she got home. As the months passed, however, it became increasingly apparent that our married life was suffering. Despite my efforts to please her, Sherry brushed off all my advances. In fact, I don't think we were intimate at all in the 2 months leading up to the awards dinner. The idea that she might be cheating on me was so far-fetched that it never even crossed my mind. Part 2. Rage. I discovered Sherry's infidelity with her boss on the night of her company's annual awards dinner. The news was impossible to digest. Every year, we attended this dinner to celebrate the company's achievements and to honor key contributors. As we readied ourselves for the event, I still couldn't wrap my mind around Sherry cheating. I replayed the past months in my head and found nothing suspicious. I truly believed in our love. I loved her deeply and trusted her implicitly. In hindsight, I might have been blinded by love. I needed concrete proof of Sherry's unfaithfulness, something undeniable that I could witness myself. Determined to face reality, I observed her closely as she got ready, her choice of outfit, her makeup, the amount of lipstick, her lingerie, stockings, everything. During the drive, I remained mostly silent. Sherry was enthusiastic because Mr. Foster, her boss, was receiving an award, perhaps for generating the most profit, or maybe for his numerous affairs. If the rumors were true, my rage was bound to surface. I knew I had to contain it to uncover the truth. In that moment, I understood Bruce Banner's struggle to control his anger. We arrived exactly on time, just as Sherry had planned. She quickly dashed off to ensure everything was running smoothly. About 15 minutes later, Mr. Foster arrived, accompanied by his stunning wife. Why would he need Sherry when he had such a gorgeous partner at home? I made my way to the bar, grabbed a drink, and scrutinized him from a distance. People flocked to him as if he were royalty, eager to curry favor. I noticed his fake smiles and how he placated everyone around him. I despised him. Almost instantly, Sherry was by his side. Foster's wife, Emily, drifted away to greet some of the other executives' wives. From across the room, I observed Foster and Sherry closely. The exchanged glances, the light touches on the arm, the shared smiles. This was clearly more than just a boss/personal assistant relationship. Dinner soon followed. Foster and his wife were seated at the head table while we were placed at another table nearby. Sherry chose the seat facing Foster. Thus began the typical tedious awards banquet. The main course was rubbery chicken, and the pompous speeches served as an equally unappetizing dessert. After dinner, the tables were cleared for the dancing. I made efforts to keep Sherry close, but she frequently mentioned needing to assist Foster with various tasks. Each time they were together, I strained to keep an eye on them, though distractions, like Sherry's coworkers striking up conversations, often made it challenging. Sherry and I did manage to dance a few times, both slow and fast, sometimes in a close embrace and other times with space between us. By a little after midnight, I was feeling exhausted. I suggested to Sherry that we should consider leaving, and after some hesitation, she finally agreed. But she requested one last dance. On that dance floor, my world collapsed. Sherry was no longer wearing underwear. During our earlier dances, I could tell that she had been. I was devastated. In all the time we'd been together, she had never gone without underwear, even when I had asked her to. But evidently, she did it for him. We exchanged quick goodbyes and left. The drive home was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. For me, it was a descent into my own personal hell. Once home, Sherry hurried upstairs, mentioning she needed a shower before bed. I mumbled a response that no longer mattered. I stripped off my suit, hung it carefully, and climbed into bed. A few minutes later, Sherry slipped into bed beside me, wearing her long cotton nightgown. As she leaned in, she whispered, "Wasn't that a glorious night?" I feigned sleep, She kissed me on the cheek and turned her back to me. Within minutes, her breathing slowed, signaling she had fallen asleep. That was when the first tears began to fall, soaking my pillow. The next morning, standing under the scorching spray of my shower, I felt a whirlwind of emotions: love, hate, anger, pain. My mind leaped from thoughts of vengeance to moments of leniency, and from feelings of inadequacy for not being man enough to keep my woman, to self-reproach for not uncovering her deceit sooner. Finally, a sense of triumph at my discovery emerged. My thoughts cascaded and collided, creating nothing but an overwhelming clamor in my head. By the end of the shower, one sentiment reigned supreme: anger. I would make him pay. Somehow. In the days that followed, I obsessed over how to make him suffer for sabotaging my marriage. There had to be a way. I knew Sherry was culpable too. She had lied to me, betrayed our vows of fidelity. I retraced our relationship's steps, questioning where it had all gone wrong, wondering if I had lost her respect, or if she had been swayed by his money and power. I had trusted her and invested years of my life in her, years I could never reclaim. They both would pay. The solution revealed itself a few days later. Sherry had gone to the mall to shop for new shoes, or so she claimed. Her laptop lay unattended on the counter. If I could breach their company's system, I might find a way to make them suffer. As a computer security expert, I was confident I could hack into their system. I powered up her computer, connected to her work network, and waited for the password prompt. Knowing Sherry, her password would be simple to crack. But before attempting to guess it, I glimpsed her day planner on the counter. Would she, married to a computer security expert, dare to violate the first rule of passwords? I opened the planner, turned to the letter P, and there it was, her password. As I rifled through the day planner, I hit a jackpot. Not only were her login credentials noted, but so were Foster's, along with credit card numbers, bank accounts, birth dates, and social security numbers. I made a swift trip to Kinko's and copied all the pages from her day planner. I would delve into their system another time. A few days later, the opportunity I had been waiting for finally arrived. Sherry once again left her computer unattended on the counter when she went out. Quickly, I booted it up and logged in using her password. Since she worked closely with the vice president, her access level was almost limitless. I could see payroll, purchasing, accounting, and most of the production systems. Navigating to the email system, I took a cursory glance. I wasn't interested in digging through all of Sherry's emails, especially not the details of her love life. I was already struggling to keep my composure. I was on the lookout for a way to exact my revenge within this labyrinth of data. The accounting system caught my eye. It was surprisingly rudimentary and poorly secured. My solution for payback might just be hidden here. The purchasing system revealed that once an invoice was entered, it had to be approved before proceeding to payment. A thought struck me. If I could alter an approved invoice to redirect funds to an account in Foster's name, the auditors would surely catch it. Foster's career would be in ruins, Sherry would lose her job, and their affair would be history. The next day, I put the plan in motion. Using details from Sherry's day planner, I set up a bank account in Foster's name at a downtown bank. For good measure, I did the same at another bank across the street. With the new account information ready, all I needed was another opportunity with Sherry's computer to initiate the transfer. While Sherry was at the gym the following day, I made my move. Logging in with Foster's credentials, I navigated directly to the accounting system and found an approved invoice. The invoice had a field for a manufacturer rebate, which I altered to 3%, inputting Foster's bank details into the routing field. I repeated this for a second invoice, diverting the rebate to the other bank account. Feeling a mixture of triumph and melancholy, I poured myself a drink, opting for the good scotch this time. I toasted my seemingly brilliant plan with one glass and used the next to drown out memories of my crumbling marriage. Days passed with no sign of retribution. No police inquiries, no scandalous headlines, nothing. Frustrated but undeterred, I realized the scale needed adjusting. At the next opportunity, I repeated the process on several more invoices, this time increasing the rebate to 4%. Meanwhile, our home life grew increasingly strained. I ceased making any efforts toward Sherry, and she, in turn, distanced herself from me. Late nights became my refuge as I engrossed myself in watching the Bulls, Blackhawks, Bears, or any other available game on cable TV. Sherry remarked on my sudden interest in sports, to which I retorted that these games were significant and a staple of workplace conversations. My intricate scheme was set. It was only a matter of time before it unraveled, bringing their deceit crashing down. I found it incredibly difficult to even touch Sherry. Knowing she had given what was once mine to someone else made my head spin. After a hug or a quick kiss, I'd often run to the nearest toilet, overwhelmed with nausea. Then, everything changed. The next day at work, Clinton called me into his office. He said corporate wanted to send me to New York to update the branch office's security systems. I looked at Clinton, baffled. Me. Yes, they specifically asked for you. They want you to fly out Monday morning and return Friday. Your job is to update all the workstations and servers in the New York office. Clinton, I don't handle that. Updating software is an IT job. Why me? Clinton responded, I have no idea. I tried to explain that's not what we do, and certainly not what you do. But they were insistent. It has to be you. No one else. Then it hit me. My wife's lover wanted me gone for a few days. I guess they needed more quality time together. Resigned, I said, okay, Clinton, I'll go. Thanks. I've never had corporate make these kinds of demands before, and I hope they don't continue. He handed over the airline tickets. I thought, this nonsense will continue as long as Foster is out of jail. I decided to escalate my revenge plan. Later that night, Sherry and I were having dinner. Things had been different at home lately. I was doing my best not to strangle her, and she was doing her best not to sleep with me. I had tested the waters a couple of times with attempts at seduction, only to be coldly shot down. Not that I could have followed through, but I wanted to keep up appearances. I mentioned that I had to go to New York for the next week. She pretended she would miss me. Then she let slip how excited she was about the theater next week. When I looked up from my plate, she quickly changed her story to say she was going to the movie theater with her girlfriends to see the latest chick flick. I pretended not to notice the lie. I wondered where Foster's wife was going to be. She must be out of town too. What excuse did he give her? I needed a scotch. I had been using scotch as anesthesia more and more lately. That was not a good thing. Sherry's involvement in the New York debacle brought her into my focus. The following day, I clandestinely opened a few bank accounts in her name at both downtown banks. Before the weekend arrived, I logged in and altered additional invoices. I redirected some rebates to Foster's accounts and some to Sherry's new accounts. Both were now on shaky ground. I could feel a fundamental change within me. The easygoing, amicable persona everyone was familiar with was fading, replaced by a darker, more sinister side I hadn't known existed. One I was certain I would come to despise. Damn, I muttered, wondering why their account teams hadn't noticed the thefts yet. Their slowness baffled me. The trip to New York was both enlightening and tiresome. The flight was dreadful. I loathed flying. The extra time required to navigate airport security only added to the drudgery. I arrived utterly exhausted. As soon as I reached the hotel, I crashed. The next morning, bright and early, I reported to the branch office. By 2:00 p.m., I had updated the entire office. I then spent the rest of the day and the next fixing minor issues, frayed cables, a couple of faulty graphics cards, and a bad hard drive. The entire trip felt like a waste of my time. With each passing minute, my anger towards the adulterous pair intensified. Tuesday night, I retreated to my hotel room and did not emerge again, except for a brief visit to the Empire State Building, until I flew home on Friday. I arrived home utterly drained. I gave Sherry a perfunctory peck on the cheek and went straight to bed. She seemed relieved to avoid my probing questions. The New York trip did prompt me to reevaluate my endgame. What outcome was I really seeking, and what about Foster's wife, Emily? In the following weeks, I managed to log into Foster's system a few more times. I hoped the auditors would soon catch on. By now, significant amounts of money were stashed away in those accounts. Then I was sent to Denver. Clinton called me into his office and explained that the New York office was pleased with my work and wanted the same results in Denver. Clinton shrugged, claiming ignorance of why I was chosen. When I arrived in Denver, the routine repeated. A couple of days on basic system security and the rest spent in my hotel room. Part 3. Bidding. Using Sherry's computer, I accessed the fake bank accounts belonging to her lover. Together, they held over $1 million. With our divorce looming, a thought crossed my mind. Could this money be considered community property? I chuckled at the absurdity. Over the next few days, the thought of that money kept nagging at me. If I took legal action against Foster, I could probably secure a sizable settlement. But what if I just took the money? I wrestled with the moral and legal repercussions. Was I swapping one immoral act for another? Did I have it in me to do something like that? After all, they had shattered my life and stripped me of my dignity. Was I even thinking rationally? Screw it, I decided. Let's do this. A week later, work sent me to Miami. This time, I had a plan. By Tuesday, I had completed all the security upgrades, and by Wednesday morning, I was on a quick flight to the Bahamas. There, it was surprisingly easy to open a bank account in Foster's name. My next stop was the Cayman Islands, where I opened another account in Sherry's name. I made it back to Miami just in time for my flight home, arriving at O'Hare completely exhausted. I went straight to bed and didn't wake up until noon on Saturday. 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to Boston. The logistics were a bit trickier this time, but I still managed to sneak over to Zurich to open a couple of accounts. Upon returning home, I started transferring money to the overseas accounts, frequently moving funds between them. This routine continued for a few months. Work sent me on errands every 3 weeks or so: Seattle, Phoenix, Atlanta, and other cities. The Phoenix trip provided an opportunity to jump across the border to Mexico City and open yet another account. Each added account became a new stop in the flow of money offshore. At home, I kept logging into Foster's accounting system, altering invoices and rerouting money to local banks before sending it abroad. The thrill of my clandestine activities was the only thing keeping me sane during this period. My relationship with Sherry had deteriorated to that of mere roommates. Our lives intersected sporadically, but she lived in her own world, one I was no longer privy to. Attempts to reconcile were futile. Any effort to get close was met with arguments over trivial matters: how I loaded the dishwasher or where I placed my coffee cup. It felt like these arguments were contrived to keep me at arm's length, denying me any semblance of affection. One particularly sly incident, of which I was quite proud, took place in November. I managed to get a look at Sherry's calendar and noticed a day when she and Foster were scheduled to be at a lunch. I waited for their lunch date to start, then acquired a dozen roses and headed to her office. The women there gushed over the flowers, praising me as a wonderful husband, but informed me that Sherry was in a meeting. As they were just about to leave for lunch, I asked if I could leave the flowers on her desk, and they agreed. Once inside Sherry's office, I quickly shut the door, sat at her desk, and logged into her computer. I addressed a couple of invoices and accessed one of the bank accounts, knowing full well that this activity would leave a digital trail. If the auditors ever picked up on anything, this would certainly aid their investigation. I proceeded to Foster's office and repeated the process. While on Foster's computer, curiosity got the better of me, and I discovered a deeply hidden folder containing compromising photos of Sherry. Though the sight pained me, it didn't sting as much as it did when I first learned of the affair. I copied the entire folder onto a thumb drive that I always carried with me and departed quietly. Roughly a month later, I told Sherry that I had enrolled in a ceramics class at the local community college, scheduled for Tuesday and Thursday nights. She could barely hide her excitement at the prospect of having 2 more evenings alone with her lover. This was a component of my emerging exit strategy, and any time spent away from Sherry lessened my stress. My fabricated work trips continued, not interfering with my class attendance. After speaking with the instructor and explaining my situation, I managed to earn a B in the course. The affair showed no signs of concluding, and the auditors remained oblivious. I pondered how these individuals could be so successful despite their incompetence, But then I thought of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and realized that maybe I shouldn't be so surprised. I knew it was all going to end soon. Sherry's company had to close their books by the end of the fiscal year, and they needed to find the missing money by then. And they did. I was on a trip when Sherry called me in a panic. I was lounging by the hotel pool in Los Angeles when she said an audit was underway and she would be late. She told me not to bother calling her that night. Sipping my banana fuzzy umbrella drink, I replied, "Yes, dear. Good luck." Immediately, I executed my exit strategy. I moved the funds to the Mexico account and flew there. I withdrew all the money in bearer bonds and secured them in a safe deposit box in Los Angeles. Around noon, Sherry called again, saying there were serious problems and asked if I could get home quickly. I told her I wasn't done with the security work, but would try to be back by Thursday. Ordering another banana drink, I smiled to myself. The storm had arrived. The next morning, the internet was abuzz with news of their arrest. Headlines screamed, "Executive and Mistress in Massive Swindle." The pictures were unflattering. The article detailed how funds were siphoned from various accounts for the lovers' personal use, and auditors had traced some money to the Grand Caymans. They were contacting Cayman authorities to access the account. Bail was set at $1 million each. I arrived home Thursday night and was at the courthouse early Friday morning. Using the house as collateral, I secured Sherry's release by 2:00 p.m. We drove home in silence while Sherry cried. Once at the door, she ran upstairs to shower, saying she needed to wash off the jail smell. It reminded me of her rush to the shower after last year's awards dinner. I poured myself a scotch and waited downstairs. A few minutes later, Sherry came downstairs wearing a long bathrobe. She sat across from me, insisting she hadn't done anything wrong and hadn't taken any money. She maintained her innocence without addressing the affair, neither confirming nor denying it, and I didn't bring it up either. I reassured her that it must be a mix-up and suggested we hire an attorney to fight the charges. The atmosphere at home became very tense while we awaited the trial. Sherry spoke minimally and never mentioned Foster. My routine became a monotonous cycle of going to work and returning home. Foster decided to join forces with Sherry to fight the charges, and they occasionally met with their attorney. Apart from these meetings, Sherry stayed home. I couldn't tell if their affair continued, but I knew Foster's wife, Emily, had filed for divorce. Sherry made efforts to be kind to me. She usually had some kind of meal prepared when I got home, though she never spoke of Foster or the past year. It seemed she was trying to move past it and keep us together. She attempted to seduce me a couple of times, and I let her. At work, I followed the case through newspaper reports. They detailed how the feds tracked the money from the Caymans to Zurich and then to Mexico, but the trail went cold there. No money had been recovered yet. I half expected the police to arrest me, but they hadn't. As the trial approached, Sherry tried harder to win me over. Unfortunately, it was too late. I met with a divorce attorney and had him draw up the papers. The trial itself lasted only 3 days. By then, the press had moved on to other scandals. In court, Sherry and Foster sat at opposite ends of the defendant's table, with their attorneys between them. I attended all 3 days, listening as the auditors described the crime and traced the money trail. They presented a solid case linking the transactions to Foster's and Sherry's logins. The defense argued that the passwords could have been hacked, but the prosecution successfully connected the transactions to their computers. They were both in deep trouble. The prosecution painted Foster as controlling and manipulative and depicted Sherry as an easily influenced accomplice. It seemed the jury believed the story. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury retired to reach a verdict. Sherry and I found a small conference room and took a seat. I had to end this. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out the divorce papers, citing irreconcilable differences. Sherry accepted them with a sad look. "I was considering filing for adultery," I said. "But that was never proven," Sherry quickly cut in. "I have pictures," I replied. Her face fell as I reached into my pocket and took out a stack of photos, handing the top one to her. It showed Emily and me at the top of the Empire State Building. "Not adultery on your part. On mine," I continued. Foster's wife, Emily, came to my office the day of the awards dinner last year. She had a private investigator tailing her husband and had proof of his affairs. And by affairs, I mean you weren't his first. I was crushed. I called her a liar and didn't believe her until that night. I know you disappeared with him for a while, and I know he took your panties. The next day, I sent Emily an email to apologize. Tears welled up in my eyes as I finished speaking. When you and Foster sent me to New York, I knew exactly what the trip was meant for. It was so that you two could be together. I wondered how you managed to get Emily out of town, so it was quite a shock when she appeared at my hotel room door that Tuesday night. I invited her in, and we ordered a couple of bottles of wine from room service. We ended up sitting on opposite beds, drinking, crying, and comparing stories. She revealed that the private investigator had recorded your phone calls during the planning of my trip. Before Foster could think of a reason for her to leave, she had already offered to visit her mother. Emily and I spent the rest of the trip holed up in the hotel room. The only time we ventured out was to visit the Empire State Building since I'd never been, and Emily acted as my tour guide. Believe it or not, we didn't touch each other the entire time. I handed her a few more photos. They showed Emily and me in Denver. She came to Denver too and played some recordings of you and your lover. They were mostly the ones where he convinced you to deprive me of intimacy. That's when it hit me why our marriage had fallen apart. Over a bottle of scotch, Emily and I ended up holding each other. We were in love. We were just two hurt souls brought together by the actions of our partners. Together, we tried to mend the wounds you and Foster had inflicted. I laid out more photos of Emily and me in Seattle, Phoenix, and Boston. The pictures captured us enjoying sights and places that Sherry and I had once talked about visiting. We had become good friends with benefits by then, I admitted. Finally, I presented the photos from Miami. They showed Emily lounging in a bikini, looking stunning, and included another girl. That other girl is a good friend of Emily's. Remember when I told you about my fantasy of being with two women at the same time? Well, it turned out to be everything I imagined. Sherry was devastated, tears welling up in her eyes. I felt a pang of guilt too. If she had confessed her mistakes at any point, we might have been able to move past it. If she had come to me long ago and said she wanted out of our marriage to be with Foster, I would have been hurt, but not destroyed like this. I was deeply sorry for the whole mess. Rising to leave, I said, "Goodbye, Sherry. I loved you once." And with that, I walked away. Part 4. Depression. By the time the verdict was announced, I was fully packed. Both defendants were found guilty. With none of the stolen money recovered, Foster received a 7-year sentence, while Sherry was given 3 years plus 2 years of probation. My attorney had the authority to sell the house and its contents, and I instructed him to pack up Sherry's belongings and place them in storage. The proceeds from the house, along with half of our savings, were to be set aside in an escrow account for Sherry. By midnight, I was on a plane to France. Now, I sit on my veranda overlooking the Côte d'Azur. From my deck, I can see the beach just 3 blocks away, where I often walk. As I sip a fine bottle of Côte du Rhône wine, I reflect on the past year. Since relocating to the south of France, I haven't returned to the United States or heard from Sherry since the verdict. I've become somewhat of a recluse here in my modestly sized house, which I grandiosely refer to as a chateau. But it is mine, and it's a refuge. Emily has visited a few times, but our relationship remains strictly friends with benefits. The benefits are enjoyable, though. Her friend joined us once, making for an equally pleasurable second encounter. Emily fared well in her divorce and is poised to make some lucky bachelor happy, assuming he can overcome her trust issues. She knew about my scheme to exact revenge on Foster and Sherry, and she found it fitting for both of them. She is content and moving on with her life, while I, in contrast, grapple with my own issues. Although I don't need to work, thanks to the ill-gotten gains and some legitimate income, I started an online business writing software for system integration, essentially the same work I did for Clinton. I can manage it all from here. I have a few contracts, keeping me occupied. Clinton even emailed me, recognizing my work and offering to refer clients my way. I thanked him. The ladies at the patisserie find humor in my broken French and patiently teach me new words each day. At this rate, I might master the language by the time I'm 100 years old. Part 5. Acceptance. I have somewhat recovered from Sherry's betrayal and our subsequent divorce. However, I'm struggling more with justifying my own actions. I recall a case study from a college psychology class that comes to mind. It detailed a husband who went missing, only to resurface years later. The study described how, one day, this man was leaving work early to catch the World Series game between the Oakland Athletics and the San Francisco Giants. He lived in the San Francisco Bay Area with his wife and 2 young children. Just as he was exiting his office, the Loma Prieta earthquake struck. He nearly lost his life as bricks and large chunks of the building crumbled around him, narrowly missing him. This near-death experience served as a wake-up call for the man. In that moment, he realized how fragile life was and saw just how unhappy he had been. He recognized all the things he wanted to accomplish before he died. In a sudden and impulsive move, he rushed home, packed his things, and left his wife and children without a word. About 4 years later, authorities found him living happily with a new wife and child. He was arrested and underwent a psychological evaluation. The psychiatrist concluded that the man's drastic actions were triggered by the life-altering realization during the earthquake. His perspective on life shifted dramatically, making him acutely aware that it could end at any moment. Driven by this newfound realization, he abandoned all responsibilities and fled. However, as time passed, he subconsciously recognized that his world wasn't one where death lurked around every corner. Gradually, he returned to his previously comfortable existence, once again becoming a happily married family man. Perhaps my experience mirrors his. When I was in love and could trust the people dear to me, I was a good, honest man. I played by the rules, never cheated on my taxes, lied, or entertained thoughts of another woman. Sherry was my world, and I loved her with every fiber of my being. But the agony of betrayal by someone you love intensely cuts deeper than any other pain, etching itself into your soul and gripping your heart. When my reality was shattered in an instant, I transformed into someone I don't want to be. Now I face critical choices. Do I retreat further into my solitude, building walls around my soul to keep that darker version of myself at bay? Or can I slowly allow others in, reintroducing the better parts of me to the world? I'm uncertain where the answer lies. Yet there's a flicker of hope. The little blonde girl at the patisserie is quite charming. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.